Hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Adult Programs and Community Engagement Coordinator here at the Haley Public Library. Tonight's talk is Pick Your Poison with forensic chemist Cat Helms. This occasional series promises to be a fun and entertaining look at the history of poisons, famous poisonings, government responses, how poisons affect our bodies, and ways to protect ourselves from exposure to these toxins. So I always like to feature a book, and this is a really amazing book, The Poison Squad by Deborah Bloom. I see Kat nodding her head back and forth. And just reading the inside flap, did you know that chalk was used in milk to add a white color? Once they had diluted the milk, 1 part water to 3 parts milk? Or did you know that formaldehyde was used to preserve both meat and milk? So anyway, this tells you about this particular individual whose name was something Wiley, who in the, I think it was 1930s, realized that poisons were killing thousands of kids in New York, and wanted to do something about it. So this is his really kind of amazing effort, and Kat may share a little bit more about it as we go along. So a highly recommended book. So speaking of Kat, let me let one more person in. Cat Helms has a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Vanderbilt University and in forensic chemistry from Virginia Commonwealth University, where she served as the forensic toxicology laboratory manager. In 2008, she received a Master of Science degree in molecular medicine from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. She also has significant experience as a science and math tutor and currently owns Cat Academy Tutoring. This academy provides local academic support and study strategies in math and science to middle and high school students. So Cat, I'm going to spotlight you now, and we'll get going. So thanks again for joining us. Really excited about this this talk just inside time for Halloween.
Thanks, Kristen. I appreciate it. Yeah, so my name is Cat Helms. I have a background in forensic chemistry, and before I moved to the Sun Valley area, I was the director of a forensic toxicology drug testing lab. So I moved here and thought it would be fun for spooky Halloween to do a poisons lecture and then continue with the series. So yeah, I'm going to share my PowerPoint, but if you've got questions, please put them in the chat and Kristen will, pop in with your questions. So yeah, I'm going to lead off by saying I'm not going to teach anyone to poison anybody in this lecture series. That is not the purpose of it. I am interested in molecular biology, chemistry, and forensic toxicology. And a lot of people are interested, but they're not quite sure what it's all about. So I'm going to talk to you about it. So without further ado, I'm going to share my PowerPoint slide, if it'll let me do it. Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoints okay?
Yep, looks great. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so welcome to the first Pick Your Poison. So today's is going to be about the history of poisons and an introduction to some cellular biology and toxicology. So yeah, in the future, we're going to be talking about, oh no, there it is. Okay, so we're going to be talking about history and cell biology today. The next one's going to be on arsenic, also known as inheritance powder. Very exciting about that one. And then we'll be talking about digoxin, which is the toxin found in the foxglove plant and is also a medicine for treating cardiac problems. And then we're going to finish it up with botulinum, which of course is Botox. So that's an interesting one, how one of the most toxic substances on the planet is suddenly being injected into people's faces. So I think that people should enjoy that one. So in case you're wondering, that person on the right in that picture is me. And that's me at the forensic drug testing lab in front of my baby, the LCMS tandem mass spec. So that's me giving a thumbs up because I was able to get some really good curves that day. So away we go. So what exactly is a poison? Well, a poison is any substance that's capable of causing illness or death of a living organism when it's introduced or absorbed. So that's what a poison is. And don't confuse poisons with venoms. So a venom is a poisonous substance that is injected by either biting or stinging. So, we're all familiar with black widows and the cobras, and even that little snail right there is pretty vicious. But that's what a venom is. It's different in that is injected into you by a biting or stinging critter. So the central dogma of toxicology comes from Paracelsus in 1530, who said that all things are poison and nothing is without poison. Only the dose makes a thing, not a poison. So that's kind of a cool thing. And I remember getting my forensics degree, and that quote was on the wall in the department. So Paracelsus is considered the father of modern toxicology, coming up with this idea. So yeah. No, that's being weird. Okay, so we're going to do a quick drive-by version of the history of poisons. And of course, we're going to start in ancient China. So Shen Nong in 2800 BC is considered the founder of Chinese herbal medicine. And he's actually, the legend is that he discovered tea. So you can see in the picture, he's sitting underneath this tea tree and he was boiling water and some tea leaves fell in it. And he thought, I'll drink it anyway. And that's how the Chinese discovered tea. Not sure if that's just a fun little legend, but that's what Shen Nong is considered to be the father of tea and Chinese herbal medicine. And in Chinese, du is the standard word for poison. So Shen Nong was also instrumental in figuring out what was poisonous, what was medicinal, what was edible. So he went around the Chinese countryside eating plants, which I would not recommend anyone do. But this is what he did. And he was able to come up with this compendium, which is the Chinese Herbal Medicine Handbook. So that's Shen Nong in ancient China. And then we head to India, where we have Sushruta. So he was an Indian surgeon, who wrote a compendium about poisons and poisoning. And you can still buy it today, the Sushruta Samhita. I hope I say that correctly. But it was originally written in Sanskrit, and you can still buy it to this day, and it's a pretty interesting read. Next, ancient Greece. So most people are very familiar with the story of Socrates, who was executed for corrupting the youth of Athens. And his sentence was to drink hemlock. So this is a painting of Socrates accepting the hemlock that he drank in order to, die for that in Athens. But that's a very famous poisoning that most people are aware of. Moving on, we get to the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So this is the beginning of the scientific method, right? People are starting to test, what's going on in the world, and they're trying to come up with these connections, right? Testing these hypotheses. What's poisonous? What isn't? Maybe we shouldn't eat that. We should totally eat that. And then you also have the legends of the Medicis and the Borgias. So I think there's a Netflix show or something about the Borgias and how they are famous for poisoning their enemies to gain political power. There's a mixed camp on this one. Some people think that was just a hatchet job for people who were jealous of the Borgias' success. Other people, there was a little saying back then that was, those who have dinner with the Borgias never show up for breakfast. So you can take that however you wish to take that. And then the Medicis were also a very influential family, and there were rumors swirling about them using poisons to influence the Roman Catholic Church. But again, not a history major, but if you're interested, there's tons of good stuff out there. One of the most famous poisoners of the time in 17th century Italy was Giulia Tofana. So she was a poisoner who helped women get out of bad marriages in exchange for money. So this is a picture of Giulia Tofana mixing together one of her inheritance potions, because if the husbands passed away, the wives typically inherited the estate. So you would reach out to Giulia Tofana if you needed a little bit of assistance. And at the time, aqua tofana became a generic term for a potent poison. So aqua being water or elixir, and tofana being the namesake of this beautiful poisoner. All right, we're gonna move on. I said it was a drive-by, we're going quick. So the 18th and 19th centuries. So Richard Mead, the gentleman on the left with that amazing wig, was the author of the first book in English devoted solely to poisons. So he did his research, put a book out there. The next man is Ramazzini, the father of occupational medicine. So he wrote a book detailing the relationship between hazardous chemicals and hazards encountered by over 50 different occupations. So he actually found a link between certain occupations, the chemical exposures that you would be, exposed to, and then came up with this link that hazardous chemicals, are about part of a workforce, but they can also lead to death, disease, all these horrible things. So he was the first person to really make that link. And then the gentleman on the right holding that creepy little skull is Percival Pott. And he actually made the link between chimney sweeps in London and scrotal cancer. And that was the first time that an occupational health with a cancer link had been made, especially in a very specific population in London. So these are some of the big names when you're learning about history of poisons and the links that people have made between chemicals, occupations, and the diseases that follow. So then we get to the modern era. All right, this is when it gets real juicy. So this is considered the golden age of poisoning. Yay. The reason for this is there's a couple different reasons. Poisons are widely available, right? You can just go down to the grocery store and grab some arsenic, or maybe some strychnine, morphine, whatever. It's all available. It's all there. And the other thing that popped out here is the invention of life insurance. Haha. So you now have a very profitable motive for poisoning people. And the science had not quite caught up yet. And so it was relatively easy to get away with it. Two notorious poisoners of the age are Mary Ann Cotton and William Palmer. And you can do deep dives on both of these individuals and really get into their crimes and their methods and whatnots. But I'm just going to give you a quick overview here. So Mary Ann Cotton, also known as the Black Widow, murdered her husband and children, a total of 21 people, using arsenic in order to collect on life insurance. So she'd get married, and then her husband would mysteriously die, collect life insurance. And then she'd get married again, and it would happen again. And then her children started to die. It was very strange. So she ended up killing over 21 people and was found guilty. She was not executed. She actually ended up living in prison until her mid-80s. So she made it a long time, but that's Mary Cotton, the Black Widow. And then there's Palmer. So William Palmer is a famous poisoner. He actually was a physician, but he had a compulsive gambling problem. And so he was constantly in debt. And so in order to get out of debt and avoid debtor's prison, he started murdering people for their life insurance policies. Again, arsenic was his drug of choice. And a little sneak peek for the arsenic lecture series, or part of the lecture series, is that arsenic, when ingested in a large initial dose, causes symptoms that look a lot like stomach issues, right? And that's not really something that raises red flags, especially considering what people were eating at the time. And so people got away with it for a really long time. All right, fun. So as Kristen was talking about the poison squad, all of this comes about because of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. So the gentleman on the left, that is Chief Chemist of the Bureau of Chemistry, Dr. Harvey Wiley, and the hero of our story. So Dr. Wiley was appalled after reading Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, also a very amazing yet disturbing picture of the livestock industry in Chicago and all of the industries that were coming up during the Industrial Revolution, where people didn't really care about, oh, I don't know, food safety or, any safety. And so he came up with this idea of the seal of purity. And so you can see on that Pure Food brand that these are garden grown sifted peas, and there it is, the seal of purity. So the Poison Squad, which he put together, studied the effects of common food preservatives. And so people were putting things like borax, formaldehyde, sulfites, things like this into the food supply and sending it out into the world. And we couldn't figure out why people were dying. Oh my gosh. And so what he did was he had this poison squad. And so he would have gentlemen volunteer, and they would sit at a table, and he would serve them food with increasingly large amounts of these chemicals in them and just see what would happen. It's not great. So he realized that we have a major problem with our food quality in this country. And so he came up with the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. It didn't really have teeth at the time, but it does end up getting teeth a little bit later. And we'll talk about why that became the case. So the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 prevented the manufacture, sale, transportation of adulterated, misbranded, poisonous foods, drugs, medicine, or liqueurs. This was also taking aim at patent medicines, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. And it's one of my favorite topics of all time. And so the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 paved the way for the FDA to make sure that foods and products are labeled correctly, so consumers know what they're buying. Okay, so in order for the Pure Food and Drug Act to get some teeth, we needed to have a little bit of growing pains, like the ginger jake paralysis epidemic. So during Prohibition, you couldn't buy alcohol, but you could buy these things that were called patent medicines and elixirs that did contain alcohol. So patent medicines are just what they sound like. It's just a concoction that someone comes up with, and then they patent it. And then they can sell it, and it can have whatever you want to put in it. So it's also snake oil. So the US Treasury Department required changes to the alcohol content of some of these patent medicines to discourage abuse. Ha ha ha. And so there was this patent medicine elixir called ginger jake. And you can see the little label for it on the side there. It's 93% alcohol. Oh my gosh. And it's for dyspepsia, cholera, flatulent colic, nausea, and general debility, whatever that is. And so people were drinking this to get drunk during Prohibition because they could buy it. It was legal. It's fine. But the Treasury Department was not happy about that, wanted to decrease the alcohol content in order to discourage abuse. And in doing so, the ginger content went up, and it got bitter, and people didn't want to buy it anymore. So bootleggers added the molecule you see in the middle there called TOCP, which stands for triorthocresyl phosphate. Doesn't really matter, but it's bad news. So they added TOCP to make it taste better and also to pass inspection. And people started drinking this stuff like crazy, and it caused paralysis in the wrist, legs, and arms, most of which was irreversible. and over 10,000 people were affected by it, but doctors had no idea why, because the ingredients weren't listed on the bottle. It just said ginger and alcohol. Everyone thought it was cool. They didn't know it had TOCP in it. So that's bad news. The other thing that came to light was the sulfanilamide elixir of 1937. So sulfa drugs, real popular at the time, treating bacterial and fungal infections. However, that molecule, if you look at it, it's not super soluble. It's not great. So it also tastes super bitter. That sulfur group, it's no bueno. So it turns out that the drug is actually more soluble in diethylene glycol. And a sweet syrup was added so children would be able to take this drug. Kids were dying of kidney failure. Diethylene glycol is essentially brake fluid. So we were feeding children sulfa drugs with brake fluid and sugar. And so they were having kidney failure and they were dying from it. And so after this, the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was passed. So that established the FDA and also gave this law some teeth. And so you could actually go after the manufacturers and they could be held criminally liable for the damage they were doing for either not labeling their drugs correctly or misleading the public about the ingredients and if they were toxic or not. So fun, right? Okay. So the radiation, which we're not really going to cover that much on radiation, although it is a pretty fascinating topic and there's lots of great information out there. But Rontgen, the gentleman on the left there, discovered X-rays and that they could penetrate human flesh. And then you had Marie Curie, the nice sweet lady on the right, who named the phenomenon radioactivity. And she discovered thorium, plutonium, radium. So the Curies were instrumental in our understanding of radiation and radioactive decay. So smart folks. All right. We're getting near the end of the history, I promise. It's good stuff. So there is this unholy marriage between pesticides and chemical warfare. So the synthesis of pesticides and chemical warfare agents actually go hand in hand. And that's because you're using things like nitrates, chlorine, right? Stuff that makes plants really happy and pests that attack them very sad. But when exposed to human tissues, all of these things are very dangerous. And this really came about because of the Haber-Bosch process of nitrogen fixation. So in 1918, they won the Nobel Prize for it. Great. You know, nitrogen fixation is important in order for pesticides to be effective, for crops to go really, you add nitrates to the soil if you want your crops to go really well. However, that process of nitrogen fixation is also utilized to produce nitrogen-based explosives for Nazi Germany. Uh-oh. And you can also use the same process to create weaponized chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gases. So there is this very depressing relationship between pesticides and chemical warfare. And, again, if you want more information about that, there's some really good things out there. It's a bit depressing though. All right. So that's a history of poisons, just flying through it, but those are the highlights. Does anyone have any questions so far? Comments?
Let's see. You mentioned at the very, very beginning that something about poison in the dose.
Yes.
Are you going to touch on that later?
For
okay.
Sure.
Great.
For sure.
Yeah, because in our dry run, you made a comment, and I'm like, oh, I hope she mentions that in our talks. So
we're going to do a deep dive. So
okay. So at this point, no questions.
Okay, great. Well,
but don't hesitate to type it in the chat, and I'll gently interrupt Kat.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, I'm on a roll. I love this stuff. You couldn't tell. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit. I feel like Monty Python now for something completely different. So we're going to be talking about poisons and you. So in order to understand how toxicants work, you have to understand how your cells work under normal conditions, right? When you're not being poisoned. So it's also helpful to have a basic understanding of anatomy and physiology. A lot of people I know don't have cell biology backgrounds, and that's cool. Don't worry about it. I will walk you through this. I'm going to keep it real simple. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. And we're just going to go through it. And again, if you've got questions, pop in, because this can get a little bit of a deep dive. So here we go. Poisons in you. So cell biology, right? So everyone's familiar. You have a body, and in your body, you have different systems. And the systems all work together to keep you alive. So skeletal system, right? Bones, good stuff. Respiratory system, lungs, trachea, right? Everyone's familiar with that in this age of COVID awfulness. The muscular system allows me to point, dance, do all the things. Circulatory system is your heart and all of the blood vessels that carry blood around your entire body. Your digestive system, which, I'm drinking water, so I'm utilizing that effectively. And then the nervous system, which is how your body feels and experiences the outside world, and then communicates that information to your body, and then your body can in turn respond to that stimulus. So, cellular systems. All right, the cell. So I know everyone's probably having flashbacks of high school biology, and I apologize, but we're just going to do a real quick rundown of the cell. So this is a basic human cell, right? Doing what its cell does. So the main things I want to talk about are the mitochondria and the nucleus of the cell. And also we'll talk about the cell wall and why it's important to have one. So the mitochondria, you may remember, look like little kidney beans in your cell, and they're responsible for creating all of the energy that your cell uses to do what it's supposed to do. So the mitochondria are crazy important. The nucleus contains all the genetic information that tells your cells what to do. So these two pieces of a cell are extremely important and are targets of a lot of the poisons that are out there. That's why I'm focusing on them. So you've also got little other things in there like lysosomes, which break down cellular things that you're not really using anymore. You have ribosomes, which are responsible for making protein, which builds all the things that your cell is going to be using. You've got peroxisomes, break things down. You've got the Golgi, which packages proteins for use, and sometimes it sends them out of the cell, because sometimes cells need to send things away. So, microtubules give you a little bit of strength, and then you've got your plasma membrane, which is basically the outer defense perimeter of your cell. Any questions on cell biology? It's not your high school bio.
No, that was a great description, Kat. And I don't know if you're going to be doing more things like this, but you may be able to use your the pointer from just to highlight. Yeah, there you go.
There it is.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah.
Mitochondria, right? So there they are. They produce ATP, super duper important. And then the nucleus, you can see this, this stuff here is chromatin, but this is unwound DNA. And then you've got your nucleolus right here. And then this cellular wall right there. So that's the main stuff we're going to focus on. All right. So the cells in your body get together and they form tissues. And there's lots of different cells out there, and all of these different cells have a different function. And all of these different cells could be a target of poison. So the main ones, so most people are familiar with stem cells and the cells that make up your bone. Those aren't super high target value, high value targets for poisons, but your blood cells are, and so is your muscle cells. Fat cells, not so much. Might be kind of cool if there was a poison that attacked fat cells, but I don't really see that happening. Sorry. Your skin cells, sure. Nerve cells for sure. What a great target. Yeah, if I'm a poison, I'm looking at you, nerve cells. Endothelial cells typically line things. They're, thin. There they are, right there. Good target. Sex cells, probably not so much. I'm not sure if there are any poisons out there that are like sperm coming for you. So doubt it. Pancreatic cells, super important for your pancreas. And then cancer cells, That's the whole point of chemotherapy, right? It's a toxin that goes after cancer cells, but that's beyond the scope of this course. But these are different cell types out there, and some of them are really popular poison targets, especially nerve cells, muscle cells, blood cells. So that's sort of the trifecta. Cool. All right. Again, everyone's having high school bio flashbacks, but this is the cell membrane. So this is what makes the barrier between the outside world and the inside of your cell. So it's made up of what's called a phospholipid bilayer. So that's a phospholipid, ta-da, and they're in a bilayer, hence phospholipid bilayer. And strung through this, you have these protein channels, right? You got to be able to get things from the outside and the inside, and vice versa. So these protein channels are a way to transport things from the in and out and out and in. And then you've got other things in here like cholesterol, which gives a little bit of rigidity to it, so it's not so floppy. Then you've got things like glycolipids here. It's a sugar, fat right there. Things like that are hanging out in here. Don't really worry too much about the other things. What's important is that you need access to the inside of a cell, and these channels are what allow you to do it. And as you would imagine, they're really good targets for toxins. Again, you're looking for those high value targets. That's one right there. All right. Any questions about cell stuff? Cell stuff. All right.
Nope, we're looking good.
All right. Cool. So let's talk about cell receptors and ligands. Impress your friends. Throw the word ligand out there. See what they say. So cells talk to each other by sending out these little molecules or proteins that are called ligands. Excuse me, that's how they speak to each other. And so, if this cell's like, hey man, something weird's going on down here, I should tell my neighbor about it. So they'll send out these ligands. The ligands will connect to a cellular receptor. There's this little guy right there. And then you'll get this response, right? We're not going to go into the insane molecular biology of these downstream signalings and all the things, but just believe me, it's complicated. But the whole point is to get the cell to do something, all right? Something either beneficial or something negative, you don't know. But these ligands don't necessarily come from just a single cell that's telling another cell, hey man, you should work on this. These ligands are also coming from plants, animals, the environment, right? And a ligand may not necessarily be your friend. Maybe it's a poison, you don't know. So, but what's happening is the ligand again is binding to a receptor on the cell and then causing this response. And, I think in this age of COVID, a lot of people are a lot more familiar with how cells work and how, ligands are causing these signaling responses. Everyone's become an epidemiologist and an expert. And so this should be hopefully familiar to everyone. Anyway, moving on. So let's talk about toxicology. So love me some toxicology. So toxico is a poison or, a damaging substance. And of course, ology is the study of. So this is what toxicology is. So the formal definition is toxicology is the study of the nature, effects, and detection of poisons. That's what it is. Forensic just means as applied to the law. So forensic toxicology is taking all of that science and applying it into a legal arena. A toxicant is any toxic substance. So you may hear me interchange the word toxicant, poison, and toxin. All of them have a slightly different definition, but for this course, we're just going to use them interchangeably. No one's going to care, I hope. So a toxin is a poison or venom of plant or animal origin. Okay, that's the true definition of a toxin. Whereas a toxicant could come from radiation. It is a toxicant because it's not actually coming from a plant or an animal source. All right, toxicodynamics. All right, fun word, difficult to say. But what it means is it's the effect of the toxin on an organism. So if I chug a bunch of arsenic and I feel really cruddy, what's happening is toxicodynamics. It's how the toxin is affecting my cells and me as an organism. Whereas toxicokinetics is the opposite. It's how my body is changing and affecting the toxin. Okay. So two sides, same coin. So we can divide toxicokinetics into four main groups here: absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. We also just shorthand it as ADME because, you know, scientists are kind of lazy sometimes. So the ADME, that's your toxicokinetics. So absorption is just what it sounds like. How is this toxin or toxicant getting into your system? Distribution is what your body does with it once it lands inside you. So some toxins are very specific. They're looking for the nervous system. Others going straight for the heart, baby, right? And others are just like, I don't really care right now. I'm just going to do damage everywhere. So that's distribution. Mainly it's hitching a ride on your cardiovascular system, but not always. Metabolism, what your body does to the drug. Drugs are chemicals, or toxins are chemicals or proteins. And so your body, when it encounters one, is going to change it in some way. It's going to pull off some sulfur groups. It's going to throw some phosphates on there. You don't know, but it's going to do something to it to actually change the physical structure of the drug. And then there's excretion. Once your body's done with it, where's it going to go? So everyone's familiar with, you know, asparagus and what it does to your pee. So, right? So if you can imagine the asparagus molecule floating around, right? You're going to eat it. It gets distributed into your gut. You're going to metabolize it. You're going to pull out all that good fiber and things, and then you're going to excrete it in your urine. But some toxins are excreted other ways. We'll talk about it. Questions about ADME, besides how much fun it is to say?
I think people are just totally engrossed. We don't
Oh,
have
okay,
a
that's cool.
single question.
All right. Awesome. Way to go, team. All right. So, as Kristen and I were gabbing earlier, the dose makes the poison. This is the central tenet of all toxicology research and study and everything. So, a substance that contains toxic properties can only harm you if it occurs in high enough concentrations. So you have to ask yourself, how much are you exposed to? What's your route of exposure? How long were you exposed? So those are the big three questions that you're going to want to know. And if you ingest something and you're unsure about it, poison control is going to want to know. Okay. So the dose makes the poison. So we've all heard the legends. Oh my gosh, don't eat apple seeds. Okay, well, there's a reason for that. They contain cyanide. So, right? But if you eat a couple of apple seeds, you'll be fine. Pears contain trace amounts of formaldehyde, but I don't see mummies walking around because they just ate a bunch of pears. It's such a small, tiny dose, it makes no difference. You're not going to get sick from eating a pear. Coffee. Oh, I love me a good latte in the morning. However, 19 cancer-causing chemicals are found in it. But if you're drinking a cup of coffee every day, it doesn't harm you because the amounts are so very small. So this is what it means when we say the dose makes the poison. Okay.
So,
All
Kat,
right.
a quick, oh,
Go for it.
nope, I think you're gonna, I was just gonna ask you how many apples you'd have to eat to get to a toxic level. And it looks like the next slide addresses that.
We talk about it.
Okay.
And then I've got a little pop quiz for everybody. Like, how many do you think it's going to take? Is it more or less than you thought? Okay. So one of the main things we talk about in toxicology is this concept of the LD50. And LD actually stands for lethal dose. It's a little morbid. And the 50 stands for 50% of the sample population. So you can actually go online and find LD50s of just about anything. If you can ingest it, we know the LD50 of it. So, and it's measured in milligrams per kilogram of body weight. However, some things are so darn lethal that we have to measure them in micrograms per kilogram. nanograms per kilogram. I'm looking at you, botulism. So the LD50 is a super important thing, and I will be discussing it when we go into individual toxins and poisons. So the LD50 of many things are known. What do you think it is for tubes of toothpaste? Anybody?
Well, let's give them a sec to
Okay.
rapidly type in the chat. So what
Throw
was
it
the
out
question?
there.
What was the question again?
What is the LD50 if you're going to ingest tubes of toothpaste?
So how many tubes of toothpaste would you
Would
have to
kill
ingest to
kill
die?
50% of the
50% of the
population.
population. We got one suggestion, 22. Thanks, Jen. We got 5 from Paul and Linda. We
Okay.
got 10 from Gretchen.
Okay.
Come on, you guys, come on.
We got a couple more. So, you know, if you want to wait for the next one, I totally get it.
Okay, so we got 22, 5, and 10.
All very good guesses. It's 33.
Oh.
I know, but it's such a random thing. Like, why? Okay, the next one, servings of rice. So how many servings would people have to eat in order to be so lethal it would kill 50% of the population?
And how big is a serving? Like a cup?
Yeah, 1 cup of rice.
Okay.
Cooked.
1 cup of rice, cooked rice. How
So,
many servings would it take to kill half the population?
yes.
Okay, we're waiting. People are typing. We got a 54, we got a 100, we got a 100. Wait, hold it. Okay, so let's see, we've got a 54, a 100, 100, 90, 300. I think that's it.
All right, I applaud the the effort. You guys are doing great. 7 million. I know I threw a curveball on that one. All right, let's get one that's a little bit more relatable and also, you know, one that's not as outrageous. The rice one is always a fun one. Apple seeds. So how many apple seeds would you have to eat in order to die from cyanide poisoning in 50% of the population?
And so these are the seeds themselves, is that right?
Yep.
Just the seeds.
Just the
All
seeds.
right, let's see. We've got 1,000.
Okay.
We've got 150. We've got 500.
Okay.
I feel like an auctioneer.
I know, right?
Give me
we
a. We got 250. A 189. Ooh, there's a precise number.
That's great.
Okay, one more second. 1, 2, 3. Okay, what's the answer, Kat?
200. You guys did great.
Hey, all right.
That's
Marty
right.
Lyon, congratulations for the closest to the number.
I feel like big winners should get something. But as you can see on the side of the slide, water is toxic if you drink too much of it. Espresso can kill you if you drink too much of it. And so can alcohol. We're all familiar with that one. But the water one always throws people. So, you know, but it reminds me when I was in high school, there was, you know, one of those shock jock radio contests. And if you could drink, I think it was like 4 liters of water and not use the restroom, you could win a Wii. Get it? Ha ha ha. Well, a lady entered the contest. She drank all that water and she died. And everyone was just, oh, you can't die from drinking water, but you can. And so this is just to illustrate the point that Paracelsus was spot on accurate. It's the dose, right? Normally drinking water, it's fine. It's great. You should be drinking water, but too much of a good thing, not a good thing anymore. So yeah, you guys did great on the guessing. That's awesome, especially since it was like a cold something there. And tell me what you think. So that was awesome. Good job, guys. Impress your friends, right? And again, you can look online. They've got LD50s for all sorts of things. All right. So the routes of exposure. So there's 4 main routes of exposure: inhalation, ingestion, absorption, don't forget your eyes, and also injection. Okay. And that injection also includes envenomation. So if you are bit by a spider, a snake, or stung by a bee, that is considered an injection. Okay. All right. So the last slide we're going to go over is the spectrum of undesired effects. Kristen, how are we doing on time?
Great. It's not quite 6:30. So you're doing well.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is the last slide, and then we'll open up to discussion, and it'll be really fun. And we're kind of ending on a bummer, so I apologize, but this is the spectrum of undesired effects. And so when you are exposed to a poison or a toxin, you can have one of or multiple of these undesired effects. So the first is allergic reaction. Okay. So this is a chemical allergy that's an adverse reaction to the immune system, or of the immune system, sorry, to a chemical in response to a previous exposure. So in order for you to actually have an allergy to something, you have to have been exposed to it previously. And what it does is it tells your immune system to freak out if it sees it again. Okay, so that's what an allergic reaction is, which is why after you have an allergic reaction to something, any exposure afterwards is just going to get progressively worse because you've trained your immune system to freak out. So that's an allergic reaction. Not super duper common. And actually a lot of times if you're going to get one, it's going to come from an envenomation, but you can also get them from just taking, being exposed to other poisons. And a lot of people are familiar with allergic reactions to medications. So it's that same kind of idea. Your body is treating it like it's a poison. Okay. The idiosyncratic reaction. So this is a really weird one. So this is when you get this abnormal reaction to a chemical based on genetics or sensitivity factors. So I know a lot of people take Benadryl, and when you do that, right, it knocks you out. You get super tired. But there's some folks out there who take Benadryl and they are jacked. Okay, so that is an idiosyncratic reaction. That is something that is not typical. And it has a lot to do with genetic factors and also how your body responds to certain molecules or toxins and any type of exposure like that. So a lot of people have experience with those. It's very strange. Then there's immediate versus delayed toxicity. So immediate's just like what it sounds. It's immediate. So as soon as you are exposed, you're going to start showing effects such, and these can be as quick as seconds, or it can take a couple days. So just because it says immediate doesn't mean that there's a little bit of a lag time, right? Some of these things take effect instantaneous or almost, and others take a little bit of time to really pack that punch. Then there's delayed toxicity, which is exactly what it sounds like. This takes a few days, weeks, months, right? Because some of these toxins can build up and it's really difficult for your body to metabolize and excrete. And so they are being distributed throughout the body, and sometimes they hang out there for a little while. And so you can get this delayed toxic effect. Delayed toxicity can also come from repeated exposures. Okay. So, you could get with arsenic poisoning, which we will discuss. There's two different approaches. You can either have immediate, which is this super high dose, bam, right? And then you just get these horrible cascading effects, and it takes effect really, really quickly, versus delayed toxicity, which is someone who's been poisoning you with arsenic for days, weeks, months, sometimes years. And so that delayed toxicity is going to look different than an immediate toxicity. Does that make sense? I hope. And then
I have a quick question on that. Would that be like radiation?
Yes.
Where it builds up in the body?
Mm-hmm. So if you are exposed to just one single tough high blast of radiation, you're going to have immediate effects, but there's also delayed effects just because of the way that radiation goes after cells. And so sometimes you're going to get a combination of both. But if you're exposed to low levels of radiation over a very long period of time, you bet it's delayed toxicity.
Okay, thanks.
So everyone be careful when you get x-rays. It's not as laissez-faire as we all believe and hope. So take that seriously. Then there's reversible versus irreversible toxic effects. So it's exactly what it sounds like. Reversible, hopefully there's an antidote. Not all the stuff we're going to talk about has one. So it's kind of a bummer. But if you can reverse the effects of it, great. Sometimes you can. Irreversible toxic effects, not so much. This one's a bummer. So if you're exposed to a toxin or a toxicant or a venom, you can have a combination of both of these things, but the irreversible toxic effects tend to be a little bit more chronic. And, even if you've been hit with an acute exposure, you're still going to have these toxic effects that never go away. So lead causes irreversible damage, radiation, extremely irreversible damage. Whereas some of the things that we're going to talk about, there's an antidote, or if you give enough time, your body will clear it. And hopefully you will have very limited effects from your exposure. So that's always the hope. If you're going to be exposed, you hope it's irreversible. So, all right. The last thing is local versus systemic. So local occurs where the contact is first made by the toxicant with the biological system. So, right, like we've all experienced poison ivy. Well, I have, and it's a nightmare. But you only get that horrible rash where the leaf and the oil from the leaves touch you, right? So, that's a local effect. Systemic is, this actually requires absorption and distribution of a toxicant. So this has to get into your system in some way. It has to break through and it travels through your system, hence systemic. So some toxicants produce both. So yeah, so that's the spectrum of undesired effects. And my dogs have keyed in on something. So I wanted to include the poison hotline on here. I think it's important that everybody has this number and has access to this number. I know Kristen has some familiarity with the one for your pets. Also an important one to have because, you never know. It's just a good number to have. And you can also go to the website if you've got questions about anything specific. So that is the history of poisons, a little bit of cell biology, and a lot of toxicology. So yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Well, while they're waiting to type,
Okay.
I have a question, and it's about the allergic reaction. I had a friend who was extremely allergic to peanuts.
Okay.
And I know of children too, where, you can't bring peanuts in your lunch anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes it's just the smell. Sometimes it's somebody just left the room after eating a peanut butter sandwich and so could you talk a little bit about, if you could, about that sort of, how does that work?
Well, allergic reactions are kind of their own little animal. So, we include them in the spectrum of undesired effects because they're definitely a reality. So, because it may not be that your body in an allergic reaction isn't, it's kind of complicated. So, hate saying that, but an allergy is your immune system going into overdrive. And so what's happening with an allergy is that you are exposed to a chemical, of some kind, or, for the most part, it's a chemical or a protein, and your immune system is going into this cascade where it's overproducing the cytokine response, and it is recruiting all sorts of other cells to the point where it is damaging to yourself. So that's what an allergy is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so peanuts can be just an extreme, immediate version of that. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And most allergies come on real quick. So I was stung by a bee last weekend and I'm highly allergic. And the minute I felt that razor hot, dagger poke into my arm, I went, oh no, I'm in trouble. And immediately pain, red, inflammation, heat. And so that is my immune system going into overdrive. And so it's recruiting all of these different cells from my immune system, as well as opening up blood vessels. It just floods in. And then you're also getting hormones, all the things. And so, you have to tell your immune system to chill out. And so that's why, EpiPens or Benadryl, all of these things are going after those immune modulators that are in hyperdrive in response to chemical exposure. So,
Oh,
yeah,
great.
and
I mean,
peanuts just
I'm
have to be
sorry, but
very familiar. Yeah, and peanuts are a
it's like,
very
hey, great,
common
Kat.
one. No,
So
no, no, it's fine.
we
Ask
do
the
have
question.
some questions rolling in. Could you
Great.
please tell us again about the other um, uh, uh, pick your poison topics you're going to be covering?
Oh, I
We've
would
got
love to. Yes.
3 more.
Three
Yeah.
more. Three more. So Chris and I kind of hemmed and hawed about it because I've got a nice little catalog of death and destruction. And so, but we thought it would be fun in the spirit of spooky Halloween to do arsenic. So that one's coming up in mid-November. And arsenic it was called the king of poisons, as Kristen mentioned, and it's also inheritance powder. And so there are tons of really interesting, awful stories about people using arsenic for nefarious purposes. And arsenic is an element on the periodic table. And so it's unique in that it is a metal and it acts in a lot of really weird ways. So it's not a typical toxin that you think of, like, a spider venom or, the box jelly or, anything like that. So that one's going to be a sort of a more focused on chemistry. The next one is going to be digoxin. And so digoxin comes from the foxglove plant, which a lot of people grow in their gardens. They're beautiful. And it is a toxin that goes after your heart. So it's cardiac specific. Remember I said some toxins really go after very specific targets. Digoxin is one of those. And so that one's going to be a lot of cardio focus. So if you're into cardio things, I love cardio things. I think the heart is amazing and fascinating, and it's complicated and beautiful. And so if you're into it, I think digoxin would be for you. And if you're a gardener, you may find it also fascinating as well, since you probably touch those plants all the time. The last one we're going to do is botulinum. And I hemmed and hawed about this one, but Kristen was like, nah, do it. So we're going to do it. So botulinum toxin comes from a bacteria, and we kind of wanted to have a fun range. So we have a metal, we have a plant, and we have a bacteria. And so the bacteria produces this toxin, and it is the most toxic substance on the planet. And the story of botulism is just fascinating. And how we go from the most toxic substance to humans, it's the most lethal thing on the planet, to turning it into this billion-dollar cosmetic industry where we're injecting into people's faces so they don't have wrinkles anymore. And it's just this amazing story. And we thought people would be, it's not just used for that. There's some really interesting other medical purposes besides, crow's feet. So, but we thought it would be really interesting and kind of fun to do a spectrum. So those are the ones that are coming up. And if people like it, maybe we can just keep throwing crazy morbid topics your way, I hope.
Yeah, Kat has a series of about a dozen talks that she offers, and we talked for a long time about how to just keep it to 4, but maybe this will be a long extended occasional series. So let's see. Jen asks, what is an example of a poison that is local and systemic, or is it either or?
No, they can be both.
Both. Could you give an example of one that might be local and systemic?
Yeah. So one of the ones that I talk about, what we decided to not cover, is called latrotoxin, and it's the venom of a black widow spider. And so that could be, it is both local and systemic, because you're going to get local effects from where the spider bites you. And so this particular venom goes after sodium potassium channels. And so what it does is it goes after muscle cells, and it's extremely painful. So at the site of the bite, you're going to get local redness, swelling, heat, a tingling sensation, and then that tingling sensation is going to turn into excruciating pain. So that's going to be your local, I'm just saying it, pretending it bit me on my arm here. I've never been bit by one. I don't want to, but that's the word on the street. It's excruciating. The systemic is going to actually affect your muscle system throughout your entire body. And the main concern there is it's going after your diaphragm. And if your diaphragm doesn't work, you don't breathe. And if you don't breathe, you have a problem. And so that's an example of a toxin that has both local and systemic toxicity. That's a great question. Thank you. I hope I answered it okay.
Yeah, great. And then we have another question from Gretchen.
Okay.
What are some examples of useful toxins? Wait a minute. Let's see. What are some examples of useful toxins like chemotherapy, Botox, and how are they discovered as such?
Great question. Okay, so the Botox one we're going to cover a lot in when we get to that particular topic for the lecture series. So I don't want to spoil too much about it. But it was actually the idea to isolate it actually came from Fort Detrick when people thought, hey, you know what would be a really effective bioweapon? Botulism toxin. Turns out it's not that great. So, but it actually, there is this weird marriage again, just like there is between pesticides and chemical warfare. There's a weird marriage between biological weapons and then people going, oh, hey, maybe we shouldn't cause mass destruction and death with this. Instead, maybe we could treat your business. And that's how botulism kind of came into being without, spoiler alert. So that's, yeah, and there's a lot of different toxins that came about that way where people thought, this would be a really great molecule for X. And then it turns out it's not so great, but it really is surprise. Solely great for this. So yeah, and then as far as chemotherapy agents go, I have a background a little bit in cancer research after I got my master's degree, and cancer is it's uncontrolled cell growth. That's what a cancer is. And so you have to find molecules that specifically target that type of growth. And so there's always new things coming down the pipe. The problem with chemotherapy is that while you're trying to go after tumor cells, a lot of times these drugs have a hard time differentiating between a tumor cell and a normal cell. And that's where you get the toxicity. Also, these drugs that's only one obstacle. There's very many of them. And another one is that we talked about ADME, so absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. And so in the process of metabolizing these drugs, they have to go through liver and kidney. And there are a lot of things out there that are not good for livers and kidneys, and chemotherapy drugs are one of those. The other thing is a lot of chemotherapy drugs are going after cells that are rapidly dividing because tumor cells are rapidly dividing. And so not only are you targeting tumor cells, but this is the reason why you have issues with your hair and your skin and things like that, because those cells are rapidly dividing and growing. And it's a tough battle. And there's new stuff coming down. There's new discoveries being made all the time. And the dream is to find a drug that targets specifically tumor cells without damaging your healthy cells, that's also safe for your entire body system and can be metabolized and excreted without causing additional damage. So, we'll hopefully something really cool is coming down the pipe. But right now, this is just the double-edged sword that chemotherapy drugs are providing, which is, it's tough. I hope that answers the question. Okay.
Yeah, no, it was great. So we have one last question, but before I ask it, one of our participants said, "What a great presentation, exclamation point. Cat did such a super job. Looking forward to the upcoming lectures." And then someone else says, "Cat, wonderful, exclamation point. A very interesting talk. Looking forward to the other talks." And then our last question tonight comes from Gretchen. "I've started to learn about mushroom foraging. Why are some mushrooms toxic and why are some mushrooms not toxic?
That is an excellent question. Kristen and I were actually talking about plants earlier before we started, this journey of me rambling for an hour and a half. But we were talking about plants, and mushrooms are not plants, they're fungi. But we were discussing the fact that if you are a plant, you need to find a way to defend yourself because you can't run away. So some plants have, thorns, others, saps, all these sort of things in order to protect from predation. And fungi and bacteria are no different. So all of these organisms are finding ways to defend themselves. So there's some different thoughts on why some fungi are so darn deadly, like the death cat mushroom. I mean, that's not good. So some of it has to do, there are theories on this. One is that there was some sort of weird evolutionary hiccup. So during the course of this particular fungi's evolution, there was some sort of base pair change in the DNA, and suddenly a molecule that was harmless suddenly has this deadly potential. So that's a possibility. There are some toxins that are really only specific to people for whatever reason. So, you can watch deer and foxes and whatever else snack on mushrooms all day, but the minute you put that thing in your mouth, it's lights out. So there may be some sort of evolutionary response to that. It could be that for whatever reason, our bodies recognize that molecule as a toxin, because poison ivy is used by birds, right? Deer will eat it. They don't care. But for some reason, if certain people, myself included, even think about poison ivy, we start to itch. So it's, I'm not an expert on fungi at all. And I am sad because I would love to, because mushrooms are great, and eat mushrooms, they're super good for you. But make sure that you can identify them. We talked about that as well. Be very careful when you're foraging that you can identify mushrooms. But yeah, there's a really cool Netflix documentary about fungi, and I would encourage you to watch it. They sort of do a deep dive on psilocybin and the magic mushroom movement, but it's fascinating, and that these are colonies, they talk to each other, they send each other information. It's just a world no one really thinks about because you step all over it all the time. But that's great. I wish you luck with your mushrooms. That's awesome. And if you find out some cool information, let us know, because it's just not a topic I know a bunch of information about. I was going to write a death cap one. I haven't gotten around to it yet, but if I find out information, I'd love to share with you. So yeah, great job. Good question.
Great. Well, I'm going to remove the spotlight right now from you. Let's see if we can side by side gallery. There we go.
There's my resources.
Here are your resources. Okay. So we're just finishing up here. I will get a copy of Kat's resources. Hopefully she can send that to me. And I have also made a note of other resources that she's mentioned during the talk. You'll get that in the next couple of days. And Cat, poisons, who knew how fascinating poisons could be? I so appreciate you taking the time to share this world with us.
Thank you. I loved being here. Appreciate it. Everyone was, engaged and excited, and that's all you can ask for. So I hope to see everybody again at the arsenic lecture, and that you have a spooky Halloween.
Yep,
so.
November 18th, and then we'll start it back up again, this occasional series in January. So we'll have something in January, probably something in February. So keep an eye out for that. So, all right. Thanks again, Kat. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.